Good afternoon and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our market update on selling to enterprise. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm the Director of Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat. I have a few housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. Love to see if you have any neighbors. Secondly, we're going to open up for live Q&A near the end of the event, so please submit those questions for our speaker in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center would be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We're humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. Now, before we get started, I'm going to launch a couple polls just to get a pulse on how everyone's doing out there. As I launch these polls, I'm going to see where we're coming in from. The first poll: how are you feeling about your business? Are you optimistic and survival mode? This will help us understand where you're at in this point of the year to help ramp up the wellness programs that we provide for our entrepreneurs. Looks like we've got Lake Bolt Research delivering from MA. All righty. Ooh, we've got Egypt. Good evening. Awesome. Let's see. I'm going to end this poll, share those results. Looks like there is some survival mode. I know it is the Q4 crunch, but glad to hear that optimism is in the rise. All right, last poll before we jump in is: what's keeping you up at night? Is it finance, sales, marketing? This helps inform the future programs that we provide for you, the entrepreneurs out there across the world. So, and also, yeah, it looks like sales is in the lead, which is good because that's our topic today. So hopefully you'll sleep better after this presentation. I'm gonna end this poll, share those results. Looks like sales is in the lead, followed by marketing and finance. So you're in for a treat because that's our topic today. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest. Whitney Sales is the founder of the Sales Method and operating partner at Forum Ventures. Whitney, so glad to have you back.
Thank you so much, Colin. Go ahead and get started. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. So just a quick poll as well. I'm just going to have you guys drop this into the chat. When you look at your core sales challenges today, what are you guys struggling with? If you're comfortable just dropping them in there, you can do it anonymously. And then how many kind of where your business is at? Are you still trying to find product market fit? Do you have a handful of customers breaking into new markets? Okay, you have that there. Anyone else? You said sales is your biggest challenge. What are the challenges here? Anyone else? All right, I'll just go ahead and jump in and share my screen. I'll try and cover that here and breaking into new markets. And Colin, we good to go?
We are so good.
Perfect. All right. So what I wanted to go over today, just a little bit as far as who I am. So my background is in early stage sales. I was a 4-time VP of sales as a first sales hire in organizations. All companies were on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list. Helped launch 6 products when I was doing that. Then I joined Forum Ventures as a founding partner of the team, ran our B2B SaaS accelerator headquarter location in San Francisco for 4.5 years, investing in 200 SaaS companies, B2B SaaS companies. Then basically it helped raise our seed fund. In 2021, I took a step back to my roots and operating and have been working as an advisor and operating partner at Forum as well as an advisor to a number of startups on go-to-market, everything kind of on the business side of a business. I've spoken at most major SaaS conferences. I teach, Colin mentioned that HubSpot's one of the sponsors of the NASDAQ. I teach with Mark Gerber's at HBS in his entrepreneurial sales program, spoken at SaaS Collision, all that good stuff. So still a little background on me. What I wanted to talk about today is how things are changing. So this year has been a doozy when it comes to how sales has changed, and every quarter has been a bit different. With the introduction to AI, some of what's been going on with interest rates and how that's changed market dynamics. And also how the funding market has actually impacted a lot of purchasing behavior for startups, and as a result, selling behavior. This talk actually started in February of this year. I started doing research. I interviewed about 50 VPs of sales because Jason Elkanis, Launch University, had reached out to me to talk about designing sales orgs when a bunch of sales people have been freed up by the layoffs that have been happening in the Bay Area. And I had 50 interviews set up. Then SVB crashed. So those interviews ended up being a very different topic. And then I started pulling together the talk, and AI has really hit the scene, which has changed purchasing behavior. And then, as you guys know, the Fed announced about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, that interest rates, they're looking at not changing until 2027, I believe. So things are changing quite a bit, and that changes purchasing behavior and how organizations have run, as well as the layoffs have changed how organizations have run. And then you add AI on top of that, and it just creates a huge cluster. So that puts startups in a major advantage. If you can change quickly, because you can change a lot faster than some of the incumbents in the market. So when we look at what's actually changed, the perception of a startup has changed quite a bit. Before, I would say the perception of a startup was, let's try it and see if it'll work. It was very much oriented around operational efficiency and ROI. ROI and operational efficiency are still a factor, but now organizations are actually looking to startups as thought leaders and extensions of their team as innovation hubs within their organization in ways that they can actually leapfrog the competition. And they're looking for startups specifically because there's innovation at the core versus bolting things on. Purchasing behavior has changed quite a bit. And I've seen this change about every 6 weeks. For the companies that I work with, because I get pretty hands-on with the organizations that I'm part of. And what I've seen is in early Q2, which we'll get into a little bit more, things rolled up under CFOs, and it was a lot of cut. Then anything redundant or duplicative in the tech stack got cut from organizations. Funding dried up. And so a lot of startups stopped spending. And so the go-to-market of selling to another startup became very hard as startups in your network. Then in Q3, the decision-making basically moved to enterprise and subject matter experts. And then in Q4, now what I'm seeing is it's starting to move back down. We were seeing consensus-based decision-making. Now we're seeing now I'm seeing a bit more leadership-oriented decision-making. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Organizational operations have changed a bit. There's been a lot of cuts. We talked about 15% cuts at the beginning of the year. We were starting to see more cuts again. Some of those were announced these past couple of weeks, and I expect to see those continue. And what you need to do about those, and we'll get in those today, is what you're measuring as far as your North Stars. Marketing, sales strategy, and content. We were very much in a growth market prior to this year. It's now oriented much more around a sales market, and I'll talk about what that means. As a result, sales enablement and training become the core of any organization. Budgets and pricing structures need to be reevaluated, and I'll talk about ways to go about doing that. And then legal is playing a much bigger role within organizations than it played before. So we'll talk about that. And it's a result of some of the data policies and some of privacy policies that are happening, as well as cyber attacks. Okay, so to level set, we talked about the recession. The recession's real. It was more of inflation is real. And so as a result, funding dried up, LPs have less money to put in, there's less IPOs, there's less exits. And M&A has started again, thank God, but it was drying up quite a bit at the beginning of this year as large enterprises started to reevaluate. And startups started to look at how do they extend funding to 2024. Now that's 2025. That you guys need to be looking at your cash flows and how do you actually get to break even so that you can survive there. Then in Q2, I talked about it was a lot of measuring and re-strategizing across the enterprise organizations. So looking at non-core spending was frozen. CFOs were completely backlogged. So that's why we've seen a lot of the fintech decisions start to slow down quite a bit. And today companies have a rough idea of where they want to go and they have some budget to spend, but it's much more oriented around testing and learning so that they can determine where they want to spend budgets in 2024. So if you haven't gotten in there today, it's going to be very hard to do so. You might want to move down market a bit because companies are starting to head into, if you're selling into enterprise, they're starting to head into peak season, which means a lot when it comes to how you can implement things, test things, et cetera, which we'll get into. All right, so getting into buyer psychology and market. We talked a little bit about a perception of a startup. Some of the things that you need to look at when you're actually going through your founder story and how you present yourself online. This is a lot of your branding as well as selling tactics. You want to look at how do you build trust within organizations. So your demand gen efforts, when you're looking at your decks, you want to include logos within the decks of companies that you're already working with. Make sure you're embedding your stories around existing customers in your sales process. So a lot of people talk about demos. When I look at demos, I look at selling fact versus my impression of what's actually going to happen to that company. Meaning I'm going to talk through another organization that is like them, that has had similar problems and how we have actually solved the problems for them. So instead of walking through what my product does, I'm walking through what my product has done for another customer because that is fact versus your opinion of how it's going to help them. I will drop companies that we're talking to, companies that we've worked with, assuming you have permission. And then another thing, will you be around on how to address this is talking a little bit about your future product roadmap. So it talks about that you have vision for where the future is going, which we'll talk a little bit about in how you're creating the future. Are you real? So one of the things to look at when you're if you're an AI organization or a service organization, posting blogs about the technical challenges that you've solved that are cutting edge, that companies that go in the direction that companies are orienting towards as far as future think and vision. The quality of your people that you're hiring. So pulling in your advisors that you're working with that are helping you with the product and talking about those and how they're driving the future direction of your company. The customers that you have, pulling webinars or doing webinars. So I think this was a talk by Snowflake in 2021 at SaaStr. One of the things they did, and when customers were looking for references, which, as a startup, when you only have beta customers, which are very challenging to get references from, is they would have a webinar instead with their beta customer where they talked about the direction a market was going and then how they were using the product to get there, and letting prospects ask questions around the product as well as the future of the market. Which positions you as a thought leader within the market from a branding perspective, as well as answers customers' questions. Then for qualified deals, another thing I like to do is actually bring in one of our subject matter experts for our technical team, which may be your CTO. It may be a member of a team who has a really strong background or worked at the organization previously or has worked with a company previously, or one of your advisors who has experience in the field to help bolster your brand and your credibility in the space. Again, this is particularly important for AI companies. I work a lot in supply chain, robotics, and AI, and these are pretty challenging areas to be an expert in as a startup, because there's really a handful of people in those spaces. So advisors are really key in selling to organizations that they're working with. The next one, how are you creating the future? So I mentioned a little bit, organizations are looking for startups specifically because they are innovative at the core versus an incumbent who is bolting on a technology. Again, I'm talking about AI here, but a lot of incumbents are trying to bolt on an AI solution, but it's very hard to do that as an incumbent product because your pricing model is very much already established and the cost structures are already established, where AI is much more cost effective and efficient. You also have heard about building out your organization to get as many people as possible for power within enterprise organizations, where on the technical team, data teams, that makes sense. But when you bolt in AI as a solution, you're really actually looking at using AI to cut head for operational efficiency, which is what organizations, large corporations need today, because they have had to cut so many people from their teams. The other thing when you're selling to companies today, it's really important to signal authenticity and meaning and why you're actually doing the work you're doing. We're going through one of the largest generational wealth shifts in history to Gen Z from baby boomers, which is causing, and Gen Z's buying behavior is very different from previous generations. There's an example of this is fast fashion, for example, is trying to make sense of it, but they're also green. There's a lot of upcycling in the e-commerce space. And so when you're talking to your buyer, why you're doing what you're doing is very important, not just what you're doing or how you're doing it, and how you see the future, and selling that future thinking and making sure it aligns with their future thinking will really get people on board, especially as you build out a product that isn't fully complete. And that kind of falls into the substance and meaning piece as well. So slowing down and really talking about why you're doing something versus just what you're doing is really important in your founder story at the beginning of your sales conversations. Okay, purchasing behavior. When we look at purchasing behavior, previously, customers were very comfortable because it was a very cash positive market. We were in a bull market. Now we're in a bear market. So you have to think about your customer psychology and have a lot of empathy for where they're at. They've probably lost a lot of people on their team. There's been a lot of restructuring that's happened within organizations. They're very much looking at how do they not get fired as budgets are getting cut. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. And so they're optimistic about the future because they're still there. But at the same time, they are a bit scared. And so everything you do has to be proven and data driven, and you need to support them in that decision making. So I'm seeing the sales tactics today. You get the fin before you get the whale. So think about in your sale, how can you land and expand? Trials are becoming more important in POCs. When you're qualifying a deal, you really need to make sure you understand what specifically the customer is looking to improve. So what is the KPI that they're responsible for, that they're going to measure the success of the opportunity by, and making sure it's something that's in your control and in that person's control for success of the trial or proof of concept. The customers are very skeptical about AI because there's a lot of vaporware out there and things that are built on top of other solutions. So you need to talk about what your proprietary value is and then prove it. prove that you are real. And then also help them determine use cases. I'm working with a company right now, again, AI robotics. And one of the things we're working through is helping them identify who are the innovators within an organization that can actually lead and adopt AI when companies and employees are very scared and skeptical of the technology and how it can be used. And then working through with those leaders, what are the use cases where there can be a quick win to show the value, where it's also a low investment from you as a company perspective. And that way that you can get access to those larger budgets, especially as we're heading, like I mentioned, peak season. Most companies, if they're customer or consumer facing in any way, are heading into peak, which means there's a code freeze. It used to be by Thanksgiving. I'm seeing it now around Halloween. So any type of e-commerce company, if you're selling to food and bev in any way, will go into a code freeze. So implementing any type of new technology that is going to be customer facing is very hard. And so if you weren't in there now, it's going to be very hard to get in there before then. So you really need to get things through before Halloween so that they can get implemented and scheduled out from an implementation perspective, or it's going to be very hard to get it into the early 2024 budgets. All of your companies are going to be resource constrained that you're selling to, period. There are companies that are growing and are hiring. That's a really good signal for you guys that it's going to be a growth oriented company and they are going to have the budgets to spend. But if they don't have as many job recs listed on their website or on LinkedIn, it's going to be a good indicator that they are cutting costs. And in certain ways, I always mention that you should Google a company. I also talk about reading S1s if it's a publicly traded organization, so that you can actually see what's going on within the company and where they've cut costs. What are they working on? What have they launched recently? So that you can speak to those areas and talk about how you can actually help. Knowing what's going on with the company instead of waiting for them to explain it to you makes you come across as much more informed and more of a thought leader, and knowing what's happening in the market and what's going on with their company. And so they can talk about more detailed areas and nuances and progress the conversation much faster in a sales conversation. They're also very frustrated because getting resources is very hard. I talked to a procurement team recently at a large e-commerce company, and the procurement manager had 27 deals she was trying to get through when she used to have 5 to 10 that she needed to get through before code freeze. And so knowing that anything that you send over, you need to make it stupidly easy for anyone to buy your product or implement your product. Handhold people, schedule calls for technical reviews. Don't just send, make sure you have all your documentation organized for them. Ask what they need, or if they have an example from another company that they've worked with of the information that they liked, so that you can prepare it for them, and then schedule a 15-minute call. If you deal with any type of PII, or secure data that needs to be secure, schedule time with that team to review it with them and ask questions real time. Drop customers in Slack channels if they're going to be meeting with a decision maker and they're not willing to loop you in on that conversation because there's other topics that need to be discussed. And sit there in the chat with them when they're meeting with them and answer their questions live in real time. Ask when they're meeting, then get them in Slack, then answer their questions. They're working on something, drop articles that are going to be helpful for them, that they're working through, even if it's not relevant. It helps show additional support. Again, a thought leader, again, what you understand what's going on in the market. All right, organizational operations. We're going to go through this pretty quickly, but companies are doing more with less. So anything you can do that doesn't require them to ask for help from someone else, as well as be an extension of their team, can be really helpful. Organizations refocused on core operations, which creates opportunity for startups to actually come in and serve as extensions and resources to their team. So if you can sell into that could be very helpful. And you want to think about yourself as a member of their team and the problems that they're solving. This C-suite has been actually more involved in solutioning than ever before. I did see that move down to VPs and directors in the past probably month to 6 weeks. So it's been pretty interesting because before they were buying by based on consensus, and you're seeing a lot of tactical purchasing behavior. It moved back up to C-suite in Q3. Now it's moved back down to VPs and directors. Roles and responsibilities are in flux. And so before I would say you want to keep the surface area that you're selling too small. Now I actually think that you need to extend it because budgets are tight, as well as the person that you're talking to may be changing jobs in the next 2 to 3 months as things are getting reorged, or someone might be let go. And so the more surface area you can get within the organization, the better off you're going to be because you have additional people you can go to if someone leaves or is let go. The other thing I want to mention here is when you're selling, organizations are looking for a much higher, and decision makers themselves are looking for a much higher level of visibility across their organization. An example of this is I work with a financial organization that works in finance ops and reconciliations. And what they do is provide visibility across a global organization. So in 2021 and 2022, a lot of companies went global as a result of what was happening in the US economy. And so when they went global, they needed to actually understand the operations within the international org. And so they needed higher level of visibility to understand that market. And so this company that does reconciliations provides visibility into those transactions and what's happening in those financial organizations globally. And so someone who's sitting in headquarters can actually get a full picture and a single definition of truth. So as a startup, if you're dealing with a sale that's at a strategic level, talking about how you can provide that data and that visibility can be key to selling actually a larger deal and getting a larger package, because it's a very high value today. People are saying data is the new oil. It's been the oil for a really long time, but that data itself is becoming even more valuable because there's AI components that are getting built onto it, and that visibility then allows people to understand the operational efficiencies and things that can be cut and negotiations that need to be done with vendors, et cetera. All right, so how do you adapt to this? So when we look at measurement, so funding dynamics have changed quite a bit. And so one of the things I'm talking to companies about a lot is looking at velocity of deals. So when you are qualifying opportunities, you want to look for a pull versus a push dynamic, meaning you are solving a core problem that the person that you are speaking with, your ICP, is working on right now. And there is a timeline that they are trying to execute within. So you want to ask questions like, talk me through what's happening at the organization. What projects do you have on your plate currently? When are the deliverables due for that project? And you want to try and get into those timelines and then work backwards. Second up is customers have refocused, so should you. So I talk a lot about the decision tree for sales. So every sale as a startup is a decision tree. If they say yes, then we go here. This is the value that we can offer. If they say no, then you know what, that cuts off the decision tree. And we're looking for a repeatable sales process where we build the yes to a close. And so there will be certain features that you need to build out as a startup, or services that you need to offer to augment the technology that you haven't built yet. I always say look for 2 customers to request that feature before you build it, and tell customers that you don't build anything unless multiple customers request it, because that will be one, it lets them know that you're future thinking, you're working with multiple customers in that area. And if it's a requested feature by multiple customers, you know that it's going to be an unlock for you. And long term, you can actually start to quantify the value of those yeses when it comes to your yes for that customer of building that feature and putting it on your product roadmap. There's certain things that you need to build in order to compete, and there's certain things that will be revenue unlocks to certain markets. And so you need to start quantifying those and keeping track of that information anytime you don't have something and a customer asks for it. And then is it a nice to have or is it a need to have? There's a really good book by Mahadvan. There's also a podcast, just search Lenny and Mahadvan and pricing that you can listen to that will help you understand pricing models and how to evaluate your pricing model. That I'd highly recommend, and I'll follow up with Colin and Anna for that as well. And then the other thing to look at when you're looking at your customers, look at where they're growing. A good way to determine that is where they're hiring. So you can evaluate where there's access to budgets today within organizations, because that's an area they have challenges, and there are probably gaps that you could potentially augment with your services or your technology. And so those are really good ways when you're looking for your SDR to go after certain deals that they can that you should look for. Next up, marketing. So I'm going to again talk about the finance organization that I mentioned. So every single market has a rhythm. And what I mean by that is if you look at CFOs or finance, at the beginning of the year, they're closing out their books. Then there's quarterly earnings calls or board meetings that they have to prepare for. Then they're based on that, during those and prepping for those, they're allocating budget and resources to particular areas, approving budgets, giving those to the leaders. Then we have so ideally you've proved out your value in Q4 or earlier, so that you can get access to those budgets, and you're in the budget going into Q1 that gets allocated for, and there will be some discretionary budget that's getting allocated. I expect those to actually be more closely monitored on a quarterly basis in 2024. Then we have conference season that happens in February, March, and a little bit of beginning of April that you need to prepare for. Ideally, you're working on press and blog posts that talk about the current problems that the market's facing based on what you saw coming out in the Q1 earnings calls and what organizations are focused on. Your ICP, your ideal customer profile, is focused on. So you're going to want to look at the content that's coming that you want to put out going into those conferences. So you have that leadership content around people looking for you. So when you go to those conferences, you're the company who's been talking about those and branded yourself as the thought leader in that area that companies are going to want to talk to. Then you go into summer where there's a lull, where a lot of decision makers leave. This is a really good time to do demand gen and research and build out your pipeline for going into the August, September timeframe, because there's another big conference season that happens there. Then you head into right now, which is peak for a lot of companies, where they're trying to get everything through from an approval perspective to test the technology that they want to. Ideally, they might have tested it in the spring, or they're going to test it in Q4 that they want to allocate for that for the next year's, for 2025's budget. Then everyone goes on vacation and it happens again. So when you think about your content creation, you want to empathize with your customer and the problems that they're facing at that given period of time, and put together the content that you're hearing and the questions that your customer has that are going to pique their interest, and do webinars and various pieces of content. I mentioned the Snowflake aspect. Those are references. Webinars give you, or podcasts give you quotes. They can give you access to customers that you wouldn't have necessarily had access to. So if someone's a thought leader in a space, it's a really good way to approach new deals and new companies to build that relationship. It associates your brand with a thought leader. And if it's an existing customer, you may even get a use case out of it that wouldn't have gotten approved by PR, but because you did it in a webinar or did a panel at a conference, you now have all those pieces of information you can use because there was media sign off for them. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, what I talk about when it comes to marketing. And you really want to be thinking about it as product marketing and sales enablement based off of where your customer is in their market rhythm and cadence. So this is just a quick outline that I have, kind of an example of this. So, you have your rhythm. Are they planning? Are they budgeting? Then you're going to go into your learning phase for the next planning and budgeting. Customers are going to be testing new technology. Then they head into peak. Kind of a general general high-level overview, but it'll be different. For example, if you're selling into government, government's been doing a lot these days. I have a number of companies who've been working with the government who are in data, cybersecurity, supply chain, et cetera. And then one of the things that I like to talk about is having your street team for startups. So you want to activate your network to actually distribute your content, because one, it associates you with their brand and starts to pump up your good pieces of content that you're putting out, your podcasts, et cetera, or the conferences you're going to be at. So it starts to build your credibility and network effects around the things you're doing to distribute them more. Because every time you post a piece of content and someone else shares that one, if they like it, it increases the likelihood it's going to be seen in people's feeds on LinkedIn, but it also then distributes it to their network. And so you want to activate a street team whenever you have a great piece of content you want to put out, because it means validation for you guys as a company that you can do what you say you can do, the product delivers, and that you guys are associated with great brands and thought leaders within a particular space. So I talk a little bit about the SaaS bow tie. This comes from a group called Winning by Design that's up in Canada. They're a little bit later stage. They typically work with Series A and Series B stage companies. But we look at the SaaS bow tie here. A lot of sales before this year were spent on the awareness education phase and building the top of the funnel. One of the things that you're looking for in sales today is you really want to be focusing your time on the companies that are in the education selection phase. So they're aware that there's a problem and that there's a cost to the problem and how it's showing up within the organization. They're trying to determine the best solution for solving it. I'm seeing, again, in the AI space itself, a lot of organizations, the business stakeholders are still trying to understand what AI is actually capable of. And so being a teacher and a consultant and helping them solution through the problem and really understand the costs of the problem and how it's showing up in the organization, and then how they can use the technology to actually solve it without bringing in the technical stakeholder. The technical stakeholder is there just to validate your subject matter expert on their team is there to validate that you're real. But then with the business stakeholder, the way you win them over is by helping them understand how to utilize the technology and provide value in the broader organization and where it actually fits. There's, again, another really good article that Sequoia put out and the various types of AI that are coming out and where people are seeing purchasing today that I'll share with you guys. So when we look at the SaaS bow tie, you really want to be looking at customers that fit your ICP that is in that selection and education phase. So it could be based off of geography. It could be based off of tech stack. It could be the responsibilities within the organization itself and the level of maturity they are in the education and selection phase. But you want to look for external market signals around those. So there's a number of tools you can utilize to look at tech stack within organizations. And so you might want to start digging into those and seeing if those might be a signal, or what type of organization they came from prior. Might be something else in mapping your ICP so that you're only going after the leads that are most likely to purchase today, because your time is your most valuable resource as a founder. I talked about the decision tree of yes. You want to make sure you're mapping that for your product as it exists today and where your product's going, so that you're building your future market, as well as making sure that your leads are qualified to purchase for where your product's at, so you're not stalling on deals. Circle back on stuff if you don't have it. For sales enablement, there's 3 meetings I like to run. One of them is a sales innovation weekly. This is for you, if it's just you and your CTO, then great. Schedule a meeting to talk through what are the repeat activities that you're seeing in your sales funnel. How can you use technology that one of you may know about to speed up your sales process, your onboarding process, et cetera, so that you can start to utilize technology to make yourself more operationally efficient, or use the technology itself to prove out the value in the sales process. Is there something that needs to be surfaced faster that could already exist, but maybe you need a tool to do that, so that you're not asking them for it each time. And that will start to speed up that sales process. Pipeline reviews are the other one. And then if you have a sales team, the sales team meeting and just talking through the wins. And I like to cycle through these. If you have a sales team, utilizing your salespeople to do the training can be really helpful for you as a founder. You don't need to run it all yourself. So if you have a salesperson who's really good at understanding the problem that a customer solves for, or that your product solves for the customer, have that person do a training on that particular use case or that particular market and talk through a deal end to end. If you have a salesperson who's really good at time management and kind of the quantity piece of selling, have them sit down and talk through how they spend their time throughout the week to make sure they're prepared for their deals and they're optimizing how they're spending their time. And then another thing I like to do is, we talked about the cadence, but also map your content that you've developed to where customers are in the sales lifecycle. So that's kind of your product marketing component. So think through, what are the questions that they have at the very beginning of a deal when you're starting to qualify a buyer? What are the questions they have when they're doing a technical review? What are the questions the legal team has when they're doing a privacy review and data review? And start to map out the pieces of content that you have and that you might need to make the sales team faster in delivering on those. Because the more prepared you are for those questions when they come up, and that you have all that information ready, the faster your sales cycle is going to be, which means the deal is going to turn over a lot faster, and your CAC to lifetime value, your customer acquisition cost to lifetime value, will be reduced. So those are just some things that I can think of to drive that. Also, ROI calculators, they are needed more than ever before, because every decision is being made from a data perspective. So making sure you have an ROI calculation with all your core use cases is really important. And I would even do it live on the phone with customers, and what information you need so that you are getting those in your qualifying calls and discovery calls from the very beginning. And if a customer doesn't know those, it's usually a good indicator that they're not a key stakeholder or decision maker. It's someone who's checking the boxes. Okay, so budgets and pricing. Budget, when I look at this, when I'm looking at, you don't want to hide how pricing is being structured today. People really want fixed pricing, but usage-based does tend to be more likely to be adopted in a lot of organizations. But if something's going to go up to the CFO, they want to know how they can budget for it, because budgets are getting scrutinized more than ever before. You also need to know how the organization is spending strategically. If someone is not knowledgeable about a particular technology, you want to make sure you educate them before you start getting into the budgeting discussion, because they need to understand how to use it and the KPIs it's going to implement. And you want to move that as high up within the organization as possible in order to capture the larger budgets to get allocated. So if you're talking to someone who doesn't understand the strategic value of your product, talk a little bit above their head and ask questions above their head that they're not going to be able to answer. And that's going to get you to a higher level decision maker. You want to make them feel good at the same time in bringing that person in, that you're not going to make them feel stupid, or but that you're going to make them look good. And then they're going to be more likely to give you access to power when you're selling, and then you can get the higher budgets and value for that company. The other thing I would say, and I'm doing this more than ever before with companies, I actually have a number of companies who are bringing me in to the proposal conversations and pricing conversations. You really want to be creative. When someone says they don't have budget these days, they actually mean it. They don't have a lot of budget. So understanding what they can put on their corporate credit card, and then also what budget they can get approved, just price according to that. If you have multiple stakeholders, seeing if you can split up the deal, because you want to get approved as a vendor if you're dealing with larger organizations. And this also means this is the same for partnerships. If you're a consumer company, you want to get approved as a vendor first and foremost. And so finding out how you can get approved as a vendor using a low price point so that you can get the access to the larger budgets coming down the line is really, really important. And so getting really creative is important. So things like for POCs, I'm seeing doing an opt-out is really important. You might even get access to a larger contract by doing that opt-out. Another thing I'm seeing is splitting billing between two departments. So if you know someone can do a 2K sign off and your pricing is 4K, splitting it on 2 corporate credit cards, if you can. So just talk to them a little bit about what their resources are and what they can do and what they have approved. Don't be super firm on things, because getting pushy at this point is not going to work. You really, really have to be collaborative, because they're getting pushed from every direction these days. And that's kind of that, be empathetic with your customer and make sure your pricing model fits into what's going to work for them. All right, so legal. This is something I'm seeing come up more and more today. Is companies need to know, there's the obvious ones that have always been there. There's compliance, privacy, data storage. If you're dealing with anyone in Europe, where data is stored is really important, making sure that's set up effectively, getting sign off for using a company's brand, always put that in the contract, seeing if there's ways that you can get around that. I mentioned the webinars earlier. Termination clauses are getting looked at and scrutinized a little bit more before, renewals, PII, and then disclosures. Obviously, these are ones that you just need to make sure are clear, but legal's digging into those. Some new ones I'm seeing are data cross-pollination. So if you are collecting any amount of a customer's data, companies want to know that the data that you're collecting is not going to be used to make their competitor better. I worked for a company called Talent IQ, now People Data Labs, a long time ago. And this was not a concern when I worked with them. This was like, 6 or 7 years ago. This is something I'm seeing a lot more in the data companies I work with today. The other thing is post-termination clauses. What is going to happen if you use that company's data if they choose to terminate? So making sure you have a policy around that and have thought through it if you're doing when you're dealing with a customer is really, really important. How does it get deleted? Where does it go? And when does it get deleted? And making sure that's in there. Legal can be it could be a hurdle if you don't have policies around that, or they could be an advocate for you. And actually, because you have better data privacy policies by you versus another company. So making sure you've really thought through those is really important. And then just finally, just so we can open up for questions here, takeaways. So be prepared to change what you're doing and adapt. I've changed sales strategies probably 4 times in the last 3 months, just because there's new people getting involved in conversations and the conversations are changing and decision-making is changing quite a bit. And what people are looking at in pricing is changing quite a bit. So be prepared to change that, and making sure you're sharing that information across your team and anyone who's customer facing is really, really important. Make sure that the story that you're selling when you talk about your founding story is how you are the product for the future versus an incumbent. You can really sell against that more now than ever before. It's actually a strategic value to be a smaller company that can be nimble and adapt and develop new technology and adjust the way that companies operate and what you're building faster versus companies that are very stuck in their ways and the incumbent solutions. Make sure you're focusing on the right customers and spending your time effectively is really, really important. So I talked about that pull versus push dynamic with the customer. Educate and align your team around the vision so that they can make sure that they're selling that story and they're building for that story, making sure your technical team really understands the use cases they're building for and the features they're building for and what it's unlocking, can really motivate a team right now when money's tight. Map your customer journey and rhythm in that funnel and make sure all the content you're producing is really for that next phase in that journey and enabling the sales team, because selling is your way out with private equity, mergers and acquisitions, and funding really drying up. It's either you got to cut your team or you got to outsell. And so selling has become much more important. So really aligning around those and enabling your sales team is incredibly important, and making sure that they can spend their time on hunting and account management versus creating content. And then understand, this is a big one when I'm dealing with objections. As founders, we really want to jump in and say you're wrong to our customer, and that, the question they're asking, we just want to jump in and say like, no, we can do da 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 da. Instead, take a step back and really understand when you get a pushback, where that pushback is coming from. So I mentioned budgets before, but this can also come to implementation timelines. This can come into termination clauses. I actually talked through that with a customer earlier today. So just making sure that you understand that so you can collaborate with your customer as an extension of their team to help them buy your product. Awesome. All right. And I will open this up for questions. I can handle anything when it comes to selling, marketing, demand generation, onboarding customers, implementation, account management. I've been doing this stuff for almost 20 years now. So really all the way to pre-Series B is kind of my wheelhouse, but I've started with teams that are, 2 founders who are college dropouts, all the way up to very experienced founding teams. So you tell me what you need, and I'm here to answer those questions.
Awesome. Well, Whitney, you proved once again that you are an expert in this process and this method, and I really appreciate you providing such market relevant updates here, because yeah, as you mentioned, this year has had a huge shift on how this process is working. We have a question here, and feel free to drop those questions into the Q&A box. And if you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see your smiling face.
Yep. Yes.
So we have a question from an anonymous attendee. You mentioned sales to government. Though it's not the only focus of this presentation, can you share a couple insights about selling to schools, particularly in the early stages?
Yes. So selling to schools, you want to find, the thing I would say is find areas that are innovative. So I know, for example, typically there are higher net wealth areas for schools that you're going to identify as being faster to adopt new technology, that have smaller areas they cover for boards. My sister's actually on the board of education for Piedmont, for example. Piedmont is considered one of the more innovative areas. They adopt a lot of technology. It's sad to say, but true. I love working with lower income areas, but it's a lot harder to get those budgets approved because the budgets are much tighter. So when you have higher net wealth areas, it's easier to get through. Second thing for schools, if you're a technology, starting with IT can be very helpful because they're the subject matter experts within the organization, and then bringing in the business stakeholders will be able to identify the problem, but they're always going to have to go to IT. So sometimes IT can be really helpful. Also, budgets are usually turnover in June. Big conferences are really important. It's very much, a handshake type of sale. So really getting to know people and being there to be a face to a name is incredibly important in those industries. So those are some of the things I can say. I don't know what the budgets are right now that you can put on corporate credit card or put on get approved, but it used to be 5K. My guess is it's probably gone down. But it used to be 5K that you could get signed off on pretty easily for initial POCs.
Love it. I think you covered a little bit about this, but there's a question here from Allison. Thanks, Allison. You mentioned changing sales strategies when you need to. Can you give examples of that? So what are some of the signals?
Yeah, so I really look at the questions that a customer asks me. So you get 2 types of questions in a selling process. There's the how do I do this? How do I implement this? How do I understand what you're doing type questions? And there's the why type of questions. The why would I buy you? Why is this important? Why is this the future? The why-oriented questions are usually pretty big signals around where the market is heading. And then why pricing is structured the way it is, for example, can be another really big one. But those are some big ones I can see. It's the why-oriented questions are typically knowledge gaps in the industry or something that's dynamically changed. And so listening for those types of questions, also the how to implement. because everyone's resource constrained, you might need to bulk on service pricing for implementation for that company, because hiring someone to actually implement the technology can be really hard. You have someone to allocate it as a project manager to help you get access to things. But really, whatever you can do for a customer today is high value, and it will be a lower cost to buy a service package than it is going to be for them to hire, train, and get someone allocated as a resource if they don't already have it. So those are two of the things that I really see, is kind of look at those why questions, and then the how questions around what's going to be needed for an implementation, and then digging into why are they asking that question? Can you help me understand? I really like to structure all my questions in my sales process, like walk me through, help me understand, and then ask the question.
Yeah.
And so that piece can be really important. So you understand where they're coming from, and then looking at like, can I restructure things or be flexible in some way, or provide them a resource in some way to make it easier for them to purchase?
Amazing. You talked a little bit about the disruption that AI has produced. And so are you using AI tools in your sales processes, or at least advising companies through the sales process?
Yeah, there's a lot of new sales tools I'm seeing come up. One I really like, that I've told everyone about, is a company called Notionsmith. It slowed down as a result because it's a free tool for founders, but it helps with product positioning a lot. So you just drop in a LinkedIn. It's not particularly clear, the UI needs some work, but I actually reached out to the founder to give them some feedback on it because I just love the tool so much. But you drop in a LinkedIn URL, and it'll tell you the buyer psychology and what they're looking for and what they need, and then other lookalike buyers. It's a really, really good tool that I like. I use Fireflies, Phantom, Otter.ai on everything. I say every founder, if you can and your customer allows for it, start recording and transcribing your sales calls as soon as humanly possible, because it will help you in training, marketing, product development, because you can go back to the conversation, and in the sales process, because you can go back and listen to what the customer said that you may not have picked up on for your next call. Or if you're doing back-to-back calls, you might need to go review that call when you're actually putting together the email follow-up for them, and you can pull out those key insights that the person mentioned. But you can start to build that repository of an end-to-end deal and what happened, and the ROI and the use case, and product positioning, pulling out the keywords on how you need to talk about your product. It's just invaluable. And then those are the core ones I recommend for every founder. Everyone I know uses HubSpot these days. They usually use HubSpot in conjunction with an Excel spreadsheet for active deals they're working on. Those are kind of the go-tos. There's a lot of other ones, but those are the ones I just, off the top of my head, I can.
Yeah. And I just dropped a link in the chat. One of our advisory board's members started an amalgamation of all of the AI tools that he's found in digital marketing.
Amazing.
And it's called Marketing Tools You Should Know. And Cliff is the man. And he's got everything in there that you could imagine that would help with your marketing process. So yeah, I'll check that out. Cliff's also done a presentation on the most recent developments in AI and marketing. So check that out on our YouTube channel. But Whitney, we are at time. Thank you so much for coming back to our platform and to hopefully sharpening our marketing and sales swords here at the center. Really appreciate you.
Yeah, and I will follow up with a PDF of my deck so you guys have it. And there's a lot more notes in the speaker notes as well. We just I can do this talk for an hour and a half, and so I had to cut a bunch of stuff out. So hopefully you guys will have that, and then I'll also send over those follow up, because I saw a couple of people ask for those articles that I mentioned as well. So I'll make sure I include those in a follow up for you guys too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Whitney, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online soon.
Thank you so much.